Welcome. I'm the Falcon of the West.
And I'm the Prince of Precision.
And we are the Attack Action Podcast. What's up, Isaac?
Tonight we're joined by maybe the most famous person in at least United States flesh and blood. What do you think, Taylor?
Yes, I am here always on this podcast. Thank you for recognizing my fame.
Totally. Well, your stash and charming good looks are unforgettable. Tonight we're also going to talk to a guy named Brendan.
Brendan who?
Brendan Patrick.
Oh, right. Yeah. The second most famous flesh and blood player. Some people call him the Falcon of the South, as it were. We sit down with good old BP, as I like to call him, and we dive deep on some certain topics and have a bit of fun really at the end there, like we always do. But yeah, it was a great interview. He's a really interesting person to talk about. And I do mention this in the podcast, but if you are a avid listener of the Arsenal Pass podcast, there is a drinking game associated with anytime they have any sort of content. So just so you know that it is alive and well on our podcast. So make sure you have something nice and tasty while you're sitting down to listen to this one.
Well, are you going to remind us of the rules, or does everybody know the rules for this drinking game?
Yeah. So like if you Drone of Brutality, Control Ninja, Sasha Markovic, James White, any
Delfico. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Any of those things. Like, I don't think Brendan uses heuristic. That's probably on the list by now. Yeah, that's about it. That'll get you started.
Yeah, there's a number of hot button topics they like to touch on. So,
yeah, definitely. But yeah, we love those guys a lot, and it's just great to have the second most famous podcaster on our most famous podcast. We're America's podcast. They're the people's podcast, as it were, type of deal.
Totally. So. And stick around till the end, because Brendan's answer to the interesting facts about himself are really good. I also look forward to seeing you, Taylor, and Hayden and Brendan at Worlds coming up here and defeating you all.
That's cool. I somehow have to get a PTI or qualify off of ELO.
So, there's time.
Hopefully. Well, I'm not stressed out. I'm not worried about it at all. We're going to get there. Yeah, that'd be great. All right. Now you've got me spiraled out of control here. Isaac, let's get into the news. So Welcome to Wraith is now out of print. And I don't think that's too surprising. Everything's going out of print these days. And, once we know that Everfest is coming and they're still printing all of these old sets, you just go like, oh, right. Logistically, that must be like extremely tough, right? Nobody prints like 12 sets of a card game at the same time. That's just probably got to be too hard to get that everywhere.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It has to be it still has to be profitable at all times for them to print it, right? Or at least breaking even. Like once there's enough singles of all the cards out there and, casual people drafting the boxes or whatever, it's, this was bound to happen. It kind of caused a little bit more of an uproar or like a debate than I expected, really, because to me, this is really no surprise. And, as nostalgically sad it is to see it go for some people. It's just like you can't just forever print something that people aren't going to buy forever, I think.
Yeah, totally. And especially when you're like, well, I need most of the cards from the newest set. I'll just buy singles that fit into the decks for my my Oldheim deck. I'll just get the singles rather than get a whole box or
Right.
multiple cases of Welcome to Wraith. And I am surprised that you were surprised that the internet is upset about some sort of news, right?
That's
People
true.
are like,
They are always in an uproar.
they're always upset. Like, I can't believe everything is not how I want it to be at all times.
Rabble,
You know,
rabble.
well, yeah, okay. We can't go down that rabbit hole too much because then we'll just sound like Outcast Haven. We do not want to do that.
Oh, rabble, rabbling.
Well, just complaining about people complaining.
Oh, fair enough. Nice
That's
Outcast Haven thing.
Yeah, that's their thing. I don't want to take that away from them. But we do get to do a kind of farewell tour with Welcome to Wraith, and it's quite a bit interesting. There's a player cap to these events, and they're, for the first time ever, I think, giving out young cold foil heroes from Welcome to Wraith. So there's a player cap, really rare cards. This could be kind of like a really hot commodity, right? And there isn't a whatchamacallit suggested price for what this should cost, right? So the local game stores can kind of set their own price, which is kind of it's just kind of wild.
Yeah, I did see that, and I think it's a 16-player cap, kind of no matter what the demand is for that store, which is kind of really surprising. Something to remember about these promos is that the Cold Foil Young Heroes, I feel like LSS has done a really good job about kind of limiting the print runs of cards like this to keep them rare, but they're, as with all of these promos, they can reprint them. So while I think that these will have value and they will kind of maintain their rarity, it's like, don't break the bank, trying to get one of these because they could appear again in the future.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty excited to get to do some Welcome to Wraith Draft. I think that's going to be really fun. It's a really, really interesting set to play in draft because there's like so many more, I don't know, kind of cards to maybe worry about, right? There's so many more attack reactions and defense reactions, and
yeah, it's like a lot more mid-rangey than Tails, for example, right? Like, I mean, one or two mistakes can still dictate the game, but it's a little bit longer of a game. You kind of have these minute exchanges instead of just like, is this the tempo turn? Do I take 10 to like seize the day? Or do I just die here?
Yeah, and you have equipment that blocks, so you can really kind of manufacture a real pivot turn in these like little 20 health games. Yeah, it's going to be really, really exciting. I'm going to give away a little bit of my secret tech. I've already thought about how to shark our event if we get one. But I remember part of the drinking game for Arsenal Pass is whenever Brendan talks about Yellow Bellow as a Welcome to Wraith drafting archetype.
Nice.
That will be one I'm looking for in this draft, is see if we can get that to happen, baby. And if you don't know what that is, go listen to old Arsenal Past podcasts.
Yeah, just start from the beginning and start fishing for it.
Yep, totally.
I did think that was a pretty cool archetype because I had not, I mean, like we didn't play a lot of like Welcome to Wraith Limited and enough to develop archetypes in our isolated COVID lockdown. So
right.
I thought that was a pretty cool archetype to learn about. Yeah, and I think this, like all controversy aside, or like the limited player cap and all that, it is pretty fun to have a send-off event for a set,
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's a really cool set. It's just a really cool limited environment because of how I don't know, basic feels like the wrong term, but that's just kind of how it feels a little bit, right?
Totally. I mean, that doesn't mean it's easier, right? It just
Right.
means it's kind of the game I like a little bit better, right? Like I really love the mid-range exchange calculation,
Yeah.
hour-long CC games.
Yeah.
But
I mean, if you pull like the Ninja or Guardian Legendary, right? Like, you're like, that's pretty huge. You know what I mean? Those are
totally,
like
yep,
crazy impactful.
those are pretty low odds, but yep,
Yeah, totally they are. But could you just imagine that if you had a mask of momentum? That'd be
totally.
insane, right?
That was actually my first thought. I was like, I can't believe Ninja was underplayed. Ninja's brutal, and then I was like, oh yeah, no mask. That
Right.
that
Yeah.
makes it harder.
Yeah.
Kodachis are still mean, but
Totally.
uh,
Okay. Anyway, you got anything you want to talk about before we get to our interview with? Oh, right. You have some news.
yeah. So also, New Zealand and Australian nationals have been scheduled. So congratulations on ending your very long lockdown, and I'm glad that we will get to see those overseas. Also, it's very important to me because we had this like 3 week long, month long, uh, very condensed meta
Mm-hmm.
development in this game. Like Arya was released, and then we had this very condensed season, and then it's like nothing before, nothing after. So I'm like really, really interested to see these two national events after we've kind of seen a bunch of top decks displayed, and then given a bunch of these really good players time to kind of
Yeah.
adapt and like develop their own strategies. So I think this could be a really interesting couple tournaments to observe in terms of like it's only two tournaments. It's not a ton of players, but it's just like uh, I feel like will be a very interesting. It'll just be good to see the Tails meta, developed into
Yeah.
the next chapter.
Yeah. Take another step to where, right, theoretically, we all believe it to be where it
Right.
should be at, right? That like Lightning Briar is, uh, I mean, I'll go to my grave saying it's extremely targetable
Right.
deck, right? You know,
Yeah.
um,
Extremely powerful, extremely good, and extremely targetable.
yeah, totally. So
I
to
think the trick though is
see
like
that
beating.
change, right? To see that there are some decks that are going to be targeting that and etc.
Totally.
Yeah,
I think the trick though, right, is like Lightning Briar is really good because it like annihilates every deck that doesn't target it. Right. So
right.
uh it's like one thing to beat Lightning Briar, but beating Lightning Briar and also, like Oldheim and Viscerai and Ice Lexi or, like whatever the top tier decks are, I think is the real trick. It's not just, it's like you can beat Lightning Briar, but beating the majority of the field, I think is extraordinarily difficult, probably.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's all very exciting.
yeah. And plus, they'll all have a draft component to it too. So we'll get to see, um, maybe if there's any movement in that format as well, or see some players, 6-0 their uh, draft pods or whatever. It's another component to add to the grand machine that is the national championship.
Yep.
You like that? Sorry, you just smirked. We have our videos on, but our remote.
No,
So
I was just enjoying your, your
my
description.
poetry. Oh, yeah. See, I still got it. Poetry, better word than description. All right. We're getting a little loopy here, like we always do. That's what you're here for, is these types of silly moments that we continually come up with. But enjoy this great interview with BP, Brendan Patrick, half of Arsenal Pass. It's really fun. And, oh, right, before we get out of here, I forgot to plug our socials and all of that crap. We will have a reaction step episode this month. So look for that sometime next week, by the time you're listening to this podcast, we will be talking about our kind of year in review, the three of us, me, Isaac, and Colin. So we'll be taking a look back at this year in Flesh and Blood, pretty monumental for the three of us, and that sort of thing. And then at the end of December, but before Christmas, we are toying with the idea of doing a live on YouTube podcast where we answer your questions live and get to interact with the chat and that sort of thing. So if that is something that you are interested in participating in, leave a comment below in this YouTube video if you're listening there, or slide into our DMs on Twitter. I'm at BattleBro Taylor and Isaac's at BattleBro Isaac. I feel like those are kind of outdated, stupid handles now, and we should change those.
It's already a brand, though. You know?
God. Yeah. But anyway, you could let us know if you would like to participate in a live podcast. That would be. Yeah, go ahead.
We'll just be doing some sort of special holiday podcast, like probably a live YouTube video or, some sort of fireside chat or something like that. Is that it? Just all of our plugs? We're,
Instagram,
Attack Action Podcast at gmail.com. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/Attack Action Podcast. If you enjoy the content we produce, for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can support us and also hang out in our Discord with us, play pickup games, play our bi-monthly tournament. There's like prizes as the tiers go up, play mats and the like.
But I'm going to sell the Discord really good right now. The Patreon is you will get access to our monthly Discord social. So what's going to happen there is you get to hang out with us. You get to hang out with Thor Mike, a.k.a. newly married Radiant Mike. You're getting to hang out with Colin, the people's champion of former podcast interview fame, now reaction step fame. You get to hang out with Mike Popovich, who is the cocktail master, and he specifically makes a new cocktail every month for the Discord social. So this month we're having Oldheim's Milk, which I think is some sort of eggnog rum concoction. I'll have to relook at it, but that's what we'll be drinking. And you don't want to miss out on these types of things. It's just too fun. That's a star-studded cast there. And I really want to be spending my holiday season sipping the milk of Oldheim. So, that's you have that stuff to look forward to. I think that about does it. Are you looking up the recipe? Is that what you're doing, Isaac?
I was going to, but he showed a picture. It looks really good.
Yeah. Totally.
We're also partnered with Fab Foundry. On its journey is incredible. His store is brick and mortar and, just a monumental success online. If you need any single cardboard cards, not single people, use our affiliate link in the show notes and it will help support us and him, and everybody wins.
Hell yeah. That's what we're all about. Double wins, not those double losses, double wins. No ties. Okay, let's get the hell out of here. And we'll see you in the interview.
All right. Enjoy, everybody.
Okay, here we are. Interview time. Isaac, what's going on? We're here with what I like to call him as BP. Isaac, BP, what's going on? This is a terrible start, but it's fine. Here we go.
I'm going to just restart it.
Nope, just go. Just go.
Okay, Brendan has been in this game since the beginning and has grown to be one of the most prominent professional players today. he has also partnered with Hayden Dale to develop one of the most prominent, probably the most successful podcasts in the game. Both of those are huge achievements, and you guys are a whirlwind of phenomenal content production. So I could see if you would not want to spend any extra time talking on air. So we're very appreciative to have you here with us today. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. I am Brendan Patrick, also known as the Falcon of the South. But I will note that the Attack Action podcast was on our radar pretty early, actually. And I think it was the first podcast we ever shouted out because I remember you guys did a podcast on deck building that we shouted out. And it was probably one of the best audio resources out there. So, been a fan of the podcast for a while. Obviously had the pleasure of meeting the beautiful people that are the hosts of this podcast in person and had a delightful time. So more than happy to come on the podcast and just chat with you guys.
Thanks. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And that episode is still our best, I think, performing episode to this day. So it's episode 21. If for some
reason,
Arsenal
pass bump is a pretty big
deal. Yeah. Brendan, we got to hang out at Vegas, and that was just like not that long ago, but it feels
like multiple years. Like that's fab time, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
In the whirlwind of this, what was the construction season? I mean, I felt like every weekend I was waking up in a new city. It was wild, but yeah, it feels like forever ago. But honestly, it wasn't. In reality, it wasn't too long ago, and the biggest bummer and probably the biggest regret I had during this competitive season was I didn't get to see more Taylor Morrow come out.
Well, yeah, it's all the other callings jammed in whatever October is just really tough time in the semester, and if you can tell, my voice is a little scratchy. I coach high school basketball, so that season has started, and that has been insane. My life is just a little crazy for this week that just happened and this next week. So hopefully LSS bumps that competitive season like a little earlier, or lets us know earlier so I can just plan my life to go to more events
to accommodate your high school coaching job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm a cornerstone of this community. Okay. We're like the godfathers of flesh and blood podcasting, basically, Isaac. So
I would have you ever seen that movie with Will Ferrell, Kicking and Screaming?
Oh yeah, totally.
I feel like that's you on the basketball court.
No, I'm like maybe, but if you add in a little Ted Lasso in there also, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle,
I like you more.
Okay, so we're going to start off with some hard-hitting questions, Brendan. So the people at home want to know what's the brand of pomade you use on your hair?
Oh, yeah. So I don't use any pomade. What I do is I don't shower for weeks and sometimes months on end, and all that grease will kind of coagulate in your hair. And then when you wake up, you can just run your hands through it up top. You might have to wash your hands after, but your hair just sticks up and it looks fantastic.
Nice. That's a true fashion tip there. Great. Okay, so also we ask everybody this, so what's your favorite hero and archetype? So you're a professed meta slave, but is there an actual archetype that you enjoy or one hero that you enjoy more than the other ones?
Right, like when you just playing for fun, like what hero do you have the most fun playing as?
So I have the most fun playing Kano by far, and nothing else really comes too close. I would say that Chain versus Fatigue came a bit close to that. I really liked the Fatigue matchup. And I felt like it was very rewarding to play ultimately in the end. But I'm really a really big Kano fan. That's my fun deck. That's the deck that I'm kind of hoping gets upgraded in Everfest, and then I can play more. I hesitate to kind of say Wizard in general because, right now Kano is just that is all wizard is, right? So I don't know how much the class would change if a different hero came in, because you think about what Kano's ability does, and it's pretty cornerstone to most of the stuff you're doing with that deck. But yeah, Kano's definitely my pet deck, the one that I always go back to, and the one that I play for fun. And in terms of archetypes, let me attack that. So in terms of archetypes, I myself and this guy Sasha Markovic went to the New Zealand Constructed Calling back in 2020, the first one, and we developed the Ninja Turtle archetype with Drone of Brutality. So it was kind of the first true attrition archetype, and kind of what's loosely correlated to what we see today is Fatigue. So Fatigue existed before that deck was created. There was like Bravo Fatigue, and I think that was really it in that format. Maybe kind of like a Rhino Fatigue, like a bit OTK. But the true attrition strategy that abused Drone of Brutality, that was Sasha, myself, and yeah, I would say that was, for a while, that was my favorite archetype. But as I played the game more, there is nothing I despise more than attrition and fatigue in this game. And I wish it never worked, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it's a good strategy. But I definitely found myself gravitating for fun more towards mid-range. And if every deck could feel like Chain versus Fatigue and those kind of end game scenarios where you, from the very first turn of the game, you're setting up this end game inevitability and you just have all the control and it's up to your opponent to kind of do something about it. That's definitely, I don't know if you could name that archetype, but that's my favorite archetype. I like decks that make you think a lot and then reward you for thinking correctly.
Totally. I would call that like, it's not really a combo deck, but it's kind of the spirit of a combo deck in that way.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like you have to do something on this turn, but you're setting up for like bigger turns later. So, you know, Briar or Leviathan or like Chain end game, that, you know, you're like calculating for the whole game the whole time. You know, I would say, whereas, you know, just aggro, you're just kind of playing out this hand and maybe saving an arsenal or like fatigue, you're doing the opposite. But yeah, I agree. Those flexible decks where you kind of adapt and build.
Yeah, so combo is just kind of a scary word for me in this game because there's probably nothing I despise more than Saber Bolton. And that's definitely a combo deck, and that's not me, not that one.
You know, I have a hard time. So for me, I would define combo as like not a combo, right? That's like a really linear game plan. You know what I mean? Like just try to get enough in soul, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have like a couple of cards you need to like go off. Like it's kind of the same thing in Sonata, OTK, Viscerai. You know, it's just like one play you're trying to do. So it doesn't even really feel like a combo. You know what I mean? Like I think of combo as like in like a Street Fighter game, you're like trying to string together, you know.
Yeah, there's finesse to it, right?
Yeah.
So I would argue that Sonata Viscerai kind of borders on that in the sense because if you do play Sonata Viscerai, usually by the time you're sonating, if you're playing something like Defense Reacts, by that time that you're going to be sonating later in the game, obviously you can get lucky and do it earlier. You actually might have just pitched your deck completely, so you can make your Sonata perfect, which is nice, and then also have the tools within that Sonata to kind of finish off the turn, which not the OTK, but the Viscerai deck that currently exists, like the combo-esque one that also morphs into like an aggressive mid-range deck, is I think that's probably the most complicated deck in the format right now, where you can play it you can play it in kind of like an ezy way and just try to like, you know, combo people and block them out all the time, but the depth that you can take that deck is incredible. And I mean, I've said this a few times on some of our stuff, is that I do think that is the best deck in the format right now. And it's not very close.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I've been, as you like to say, dirtling around with Viscerai kind of on the periphery here, not being in any real competitive events. And just the addition of Spellbound Creepers like opens up so many like lines of play, and like I feel like every fifth game I play or something, there's a new Creepers line that I haven't really thought of before, but like presents itself, and it's just really dynamic.
Yeah, there's compounding decision trees there, especially with like the Sonata and the Scalata, and then you have the Rattlebones as well, recurring from the graveyard.
Yeah.
And then just like how you're absorbing those rune chants to reduce the cost while also playing out your attacks in the correct sequence. It's a really cool deck that rewards practice and kind of tied play, and it's also like there's a few decks in Flesh and Blood I think that allow for creativity, and it's not really that common, right? Like it'll feel like that kind of in the beginning with like a lot of decks, but eventually they start, some of the lines start to become very clear and they're sort of proceduralized. And then there's some decks where, you can be a couple hundred games in and you'll find some lines that you've never seen before. And you're just like, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, totally. I also want to quickly note too that the Arsenal Pass drinking game is in effect on this podcast. So if you are aware, you've had your couple of drinks. We hit Drone, Sasha Markovic, the Calling in New Zealand. We've hit all the points in that game. So just so everybody knows moving forward. Okay, go ahead, Isaac.
I think I was just thinking like, I totally agree with you. And one of my least favorite things in this game is when like a consistency deck kind of reigns supreme, right? So like, maybe like Dash a year ago, right? And, now we know and wonder why like, Claw's Rhinar annihilates that deck and why more people weren't playing it. So there was an answer. But, when the deck is just like super, super linear and super efficient and that is the best deck, I don't like to see that, and sometimes I don't think the game's in the healthiest of places. But on the flip side, it's really rewarding to play a deck where you're able to be flexible and attack different decks in different ways and like overcome a deck like that.
Yeah, and it's a fine line too, right? Yeah, for sure, and that's a fine line is decks that can adapt like that. We've seen it in the past where decks that are too adaptive end up being, a problem. Like Chain was just better than everything. And it wasn't like 100% had over 50 and everything. If you were, tech the right way and practice for certain matchups, I think there was over 50 and everything. But it's like, and to speak a little bit about the Rhinar too. So back in those days, the issue with Rhinar, and it like obviously it had just gotten Arg Smash. I mean, it was probably clear to quite a few people that it could attack Dash, but a lot of people are coming out of Arcane Rising, and I guess to a lesser extent, Welcome to Wraith, where Dorinthia was really, really popular and really powerful. So there was like this lasting effect where Dorinthia was still very much around in the Crucible of War format. And Dorinthia was not a super easy matchup for Rhinar. And then, from what I understand, an even worse matchup was the Agrokatsu. But Agrokatsu was just really underplayed altogether, right? Because Agrokatsu was also very, very good into the dash control shell. So, but Crucible was interesting, right? That was like almost peak COVID season. There was just not a lot of people playing in the world quite yet, and it was mostly just New Zealand and Australia, from what I understand.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can see how different the game is, and now with like North America having like a competitive scene, and people's different thoughts about what decks are good and that sort of thing. Prism for one of those, and that might be one of the like things in this podcast is I think we agree on like a lot of stuff, like your whole point about chain versus fatigue. Like I don't get to talk to Isaac about that stuff a lot of times because he's like a diehard Ranger fan, so he's just like, I never have a weapon. It sucks, I don't have any armor. And I'm just like, yeah, dude, in game stuff against Bravo Fatigue with chain.
Yeah, Taylor's
pretty cool.
Armor's not actually that impactful. It's fine not having armor.
Yeah. Totally.
I got a question for you. So speaking of competitive seasons, is it hard for you guys producing your podcast to maybe accurately cover and deliver the news while keeping your own personal development and trade secrets secret to maintain an edge?
Yeah. So, well, I have like two answers to this. So there's like, is it hard because, I think a lot of people overplay like it being difficult because like we're traveling a lot and it's just inconvenient, and we always have to get it out at the same time every week. That's honestly not so bad with the correct kind of planning. It's definitely super possible, and it becomes pretty easy, to be honest. But yes, what you're saying is very hard, and the reason it's so hard is because a lot of the time it actually isn't trade secrets. Sometimes we just don't have it, and like that's what people don't understand. And like we've actually gotten some flack for that, where sometimes we just don't have the deck for the format, which really wasn't true until Tales of Aria. But in Tales of Aria, like we just like as a kind of a testing group, and by the way, the testing group's not affiliated with the brand, which makes it even harder. Like we just kind of failed in the deck building stage in terms of like innovating enough, and we just didn't really have the best deck, which was kind of just Lightning Briar going into those things. We knew about it, we had played it, but we were hyper focusing on some other things that were probably not the best uses of our time. And sometimes that's just going to happen, right? Like we have an unusual testing schedule where we are testing every single day for multiple hours a day. But even with that, sometimes we aren't able to break the meta every single week. And I think a lot of people expect us to, and then when we don't, they think that we're actively, lying. And this is obviously a very small subset of people, but it's a hard kind of outcome to balance, right? Because there have been some trade secrets. Like we had Chain into Fatigue and we're heading into Road to Nationals, and we knew we could all instantly scoop our invites. Then yeah, we delayed talking about Fatigue just being the inevitable strategy because the community thought that Fatigue was the best strategy. The Chain could not beat it. So it was completely backwards. So I was like, okay, this is very easy for us to just get these invites, and then everybody else, like, we'll talk about it after. And it's a tougher situation too, because when I mentioned it a second ago, is that the testing group is not associated with the brand. So, there is some sort of information integrity that we have to have with those people that spend those immense amount of hours with us every single morning to not, ruin some things for them. But it's something that I do want to improve upon as we move forward, and we've been trying to, is just being as open as possible. And I think that we have, we have achieved that, but sometimes we just don't have it. And some people just think when we don't have it, we're holding it back.
Well, a couple points to that. It's funny too, because I was like screaming on the air about how Fatigue doesn't work. You guys need a new strategy against Chain. This was after Taylor had his invite already. But also, so after you top 8'd at the ProQuest with that hybrid or heroic or whatever Briar deck, Taylor and I played with that deck, and I was like, "Holy fuck, this deck's like a nightmare. This is really, really good." Maybe not perfect, but I was actually more afraid of that deck than like Lightning Briar, just because it seems more resilient. And So anyway, that I know you didn't keep that a secret or whatever, but like the development of that deck seemed like, to me, that seemed like the best deck in the meta. But because nobody was targeting Lightning Briar yet, it was not represented, I guess. Or maybe Lightning Briar has a slightly better matchup into that, but yeah, to me, that deck's like more resilient and stronger. It's just like maybe loses the face-to-face match.
Yeah, so the way the development of that deck worked is it was one of our players' pet decks, and then right before the event, we kind of picked it up, started tuning it as a group for like a couple days, and then we went into the limited calling. So we went into limited calling. I bubbled out a top 8, and so did 2 other players, Dante and Zach. And then I remember I was at the casino with Zach, and like I was like thinking about getting a little drunk, and I had obviously have to wake up very early for the ProQuest want to play, and I just like didn't want to play. I was like, oh god, because winning constructed ProQuests are just terrible, and to an extent, because you have to get up very early, and then you have to go like
6-0.
Yeah. Well, it's actually like 9-0 to get anything, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to take like 9 to 10 hours as well. So yeah, it's a grind. So I was really considering it, and then me and Zach were talking, and we're like, we just have to. This is what we do. Is we have a responsibility to compete in this thing. So we wake up early in the morning. I just throw together my 60 cards. I wrote my deck list at the event, which I never do. I'm a big prepare before kind of guy. Deck list at the event, played the event, and was just destroying everyone because that deck did destroy everything in the meta, which was okay. And it was kind of a meme deck. Like, it was 60 cards. I literally only played 60 cards the entire day.
It was so funny putting that list together. I was like, oh, it's just math. It's 60 cards. It's 20 blues, 20 earth cards, 30 non-attacks, 30 attacks. There was like no I don't know, artistry to the list or anything like that. You know what I mean?
It was pretty straightforward. And then what happened is, like, I lost to Chain, and then like, oh, sweet. So the main reason we played this deck was just to like mess around and see if it worked, and it worked, right? But then we see the other Lightning deck there, and that version looked okay, but we tried it out. We swapped a few things, mostly towards a zero cost shell. And we're like, okay, Earthbriar still is very good against everything in the format except this deck, which it's not good into. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's fine. It top aided, whatever. Earthbriar top aided as well. Maybe we won't see the mass adoption of Lightning Briar. And then obviously it'd see some performances later, most notably new UK Nationals. And then, Earthbriar is effectively just kind of dead in the water for the meta. If, statistically half of your matches are supposed to be Briar, Lightning Briar.
Right. Yeah. Then the Earthbriar deck has a really tough time. I did want to kind of go back to your testing group for a little bit and a few questions there. How tough is it? Because you guys are all in different countries, different time zones. So how hard is that coordinating, not just like the time zones, but coordinating like, okay, Brendan has his event this week, and then Dante has his this week, and then the New Zealand guys or the Australian guys have this month or whatever. So you really have to kind of plan for all of that and make adjustments. So kind of speak about the logistical hula hoops you guys have to go through for all that stuff.
Yeah. So for me, it starts at 6 a.m., which means I have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. And luckily, none of us are on the West Coast, because then it would be a bit buff. The reason we chose that time, so it's either going to be really early for the Americans or really late for New Zealand, or really early for New Zealand, Australia, but and late for us, vice versa. What's the worst part about it, to be honest, because it's pretty reasonable. Like, obviously, your life changes to accommodate it. Like, you start going to sleep early, waking up at 5:30 every day. You get used to that. I'm not going to pretend like that's actually very hard. But the hardest thing for us is actually daylight savings time, because you can start accumulating this bigger differential in time, and it really screws things up. So like right now, the current testing is actually tiered, where it used to be all together at the same time, but now our New Zealand, Australian players play for 2 hours before. Then they meet the Americans as we log on, and we all talk about what was accomplished and what goals and what stuff we need to still test and figure out. And then we move forward with it. And then it's all recorded on paper and stuff like that. But it's like the little things like daylight saving times are really the stuff that's kind of screw you.
Yeah. And so like the kind of staggered event schedule, that doesn't, how does that play into it?
Yeah, it's interesting because it makes it easy to put certain people on certain roles, right? Like when we had the calling season, it was really easy to put our Australian, New Zealand players on the gauntlet decks. So a gauntlet deck is basically just a curated deck that's supposed to represent the meta that we're not necessarily interested in pursuing the development of or playing. So, we would just throw them in that, and then we would play the decks that we're actually trying to innovate on and play. And that makes that really easy, because you don't have to really pick. It's not like we're all Americans, and it's like, okay, Dante, or North Americans, right. Dante's on Bravo today, when Dante's not playing Bravo. So that it's actually helpful in that sense. And luckily, just the way the events have played out, we've been able to kind of, pass that baton back and forth and just swap it over. But yeah, I would say ultimately the events have actually played into our favor, kind of the stagnation of them so far.
Yeah, because that's one of the things we run into in our group is that, like, we try to give everybody the best uh, person on the deck that they need, right? But it's like, if you're not that great at playing Katsu, but somebody needs some reps on Katsu, it's like, that's one of the things that's tough for us is fitting in, because we're all like West Coasters.
Yeah.
And in America too. So, yeah, sometimes getting those quality, like, you have this deck you think might beat this thing, but somebody else has got to get off their deck that they're trying to develop and that sort of thing. And it's all for the same event. So,
because if you're playing, like, so if we go back to like Monarch, if I'm playing Chain and Dante is playing Chain, and then we're like, okay, we need to test this into Fatigue and the Prism. If I play Prism and I play Fatigue, it's legitimately a total waste of time for me, which is worth it sometimes because it's beneficial to my teammate. But it is like, if it's if it's a deck that has like a particular strategy that is kind of the same every time, and you understand how to do it, and you just need it to be there so that you can practice against it. The person who's piloting at that is effectively kind of wasting their time to an extent, right? There's definitely a portion of that where you're helping out your teammate, and that's why you do it. But if you can have multiple players that don't have the same event that can play those decks and not suffer, some sort of opportunity cost when they go to play their own event, it's actually quite ideal.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we've also run into, right, like if I'm playing Labaya into Taylor's Chain, it's like really educational for me, but Taylor doesn't give a shit. He's not going to play Labaya. It's coming up. And
lo and behold, then I do play you. So good thing we tested it.
Didn't help me. I think I beat you twice in a row before that event, and then you beat me round 2 in that event. Like, oh, great.
Just win when it matters.
When it matters. But anyway, I was also going to ask, and I know this could be a simple answer like reps or more people or whatever, but so now that the game is quite a bit bigger, and there's a lot of good players out there, right? So you have your testing group, right? And like Tyler Horspool has his testing group, right? So how do you try to find an edge when you're or is it just the science of attacking them?
So it's mostly the process, right? Like, I try to beat everybody on discipline and work and take talent completely out of it. Well, I think that our group is populated by a lot of extremely talented players. One thing that I think is the most important, and the role that I've tried to take up and try to fulfill, is curating a schedule that everybody sticks to, and that is extremely rigid. And luckily we don't really have to like punish anybody because nobody breaks it and everybody's very motivated. But there is there's definitely an understanding that this is what you do, and you do show up every single day, and that we are here to work and accomplish something. Like, obviously we have fun as well, but a lot of us are taking time out of our sleep schedules, taking time out of our days and our love, hanging out with our loved ones. So it's a sacrifice. Like, playing Flesh and Blood is fun, but playing it every day, and sometimes on the days you don't want to do it, is like is not fun sometimes. But those are the most important days. Any day that in my mind, any day that you wake up and you don't want to do it, that's the day that you have to do it, where it's the most important. So yeah, it's interesting, but for me, it's our group's edge is discipline, right, and work rate, and that's I think that we can keep that up and trust the process.
I think that's a pretty admirable discipline, because like I run into when we're playing, like anytime I'm not in a tournament, I'm interested in like exploring different lines, right? Or I don't care about winning so much, but when you're play testing for your group or for your partners, I feel like you have to, like, you can't get creative, right? Like, you have to stay or play super disciplined and play to win, or like show up with your A game, or at least your B game every time, just to create that situation for them to win.
Yeah, I think that like people definitely do get creative, and we definitely do goof off and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's just important that we always take the first step every day, which is just being there and then just focusing on our goals and what we're trying to actually solve. Because if we're just showing up and testing, then we're doing the wrong thing. We've had that conversation multiple times in our group that we're here to accomplish like set goals, right? We're not here to just play for no reason. And then the reason that we show up every day is to build that habit and build that discipline and try to just, get in those 10,000 hours to become a master, as they say. But yeah, like I honestly, that's the part that I take the most pride in, is that we've been able to curate a group that just keeps their stuff together, and we all have really I think goal congruity is really important. I think we all have similar goals, and we're all willing to work a similar amount to get there.
Mm. Nice. That's awesome. Do you so what is it about, like, well, why Flesh and Blood for you? Like, were you like, oh, this is a new game, I'm a competitive person, I could be really good at this, I think, or I would like to be really good at this, but why, right? Like, why Flesh and Blood? Why do you want to be really good at it, etc.?
Yeah, I've had this like weird tendency throughout my entire life to just find things and just obsess over them to like an extreme detriment to the rest of my life, right? When I was younger, it was like video games. Sometimes it was other things. But I just tend to like hyper focus on one thing, and then I'll get really excited, really passionate about this one thing, and then a lot of things will fall away, right? I definitely have struggled with balance in the past. But Flesh and Blood was similar, right? I saw the game. I had been playing a little bit of Magic. I was at an F&M draft. It like wasn't firing. And then at my local game store, they just had this new game, and I was like, looks cool. Bought all of the starter decks. And then we started playing, and then I just made my partner at the time play with me just like, as much as possible. I really liked the game, and then I was just buying tons of product and went out to the first tournament. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I definitely made an effort to kind of get to know James and get to know Sasha. And I think that was probably, aside from me being, completely obsessed with the game, playing a lot and being determined to get better, networking with the correct people took me very far, right? Because I was able to go to New Zealand. I was testing with Sasha. I had the best at that time, the best teammate in the world to test with. And I was this dude this is effectively my first card game. The Calling in Austin was my first card tournament.
Yeah. It's similar to us. Flesh and Blood is really the first thing we've really dove into in terms of like trying to be good at something that isn't like a traditional sport or something like that, Yeah.
And there's the question you asked too, is like, why Flesh and Blood?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like the answer that I think that we all have, which is like the game is just incredible, right? But outside of that, the people are really unique in this game. And maybe that's because I was able to get in early and there wasn't a lot of us out there, and pretty much everybody that was in it back then was just really passionate about it because it was pretty small. But even nowadays, like the relationships I've made and the people I've met and just the things I've done too. Like I went to New Zealand, which is something I probably may have never done in my entire life. If I hadn't, been able to go there for Flesh and Blood, and then I've been traveling over the U.S., meeting all these new friends and just all these new relationships. It's been so much more than a card game for me. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I feel that. Like, we're about to record our next episode of the reaction step, and we're doing, spoilers, or not spoilers, but a sweet preview. Look back, give our like year in review and that sort of thing. And that's one of the biggest takeaways for me, and one of the biggest motivators as well, is just like, I got to meet you. Like, I consider Hayden one of my friends now too. Like, our buddy Colin is like now one of my best friends. I got a friend for life and that sort of thing. And it's just, I'm excited for the next Road to Nat season to like go see everybody who I met during the first Road to Nat season, all those like cool Bay Area folks and that sort of thing. So, just beyond crushing everybody and winning Road to Nats, it's about those relationships as well, for sure. So
yeah.
Excellent. Isaac, you look like you have something to say.
Oh, sure. I have plenty to say. Didn't have anything on deck though. And I agree. For us, it's been a really wild ride because this particular year in review has gone from like, this game's pretty fun. Let's play it with our friends, to like competing at like high level tournaments.
Let's top 8 at nationals. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like, something that we probably did not see coming last October when we were like, opening first edition boxes and Crucible and getting the game. So it has been pretty fun ride. I can't imagine the journey from Welcome to Wraith or the very beginning. When James White is like just at the journey.
Yeah, I have funny stories about James White. He's just like, I mean, it's incredible because he's just like such a figure now, right? He's such a monolith of a human being at this point because the game has become so successful and we've seen it just expand and the design has been perfect. And I don't know, we're just becoming like one of the biggest games in the world. But when I first met James, he was just, obviously Flesh and Blood was a thing, but he had just come down from New Zealand and was setting up this tournament in this like little shop in Austin, Texas. And you flew there with Sasha and they were kind of like bootleg setting it up the day before. And I walked in and like everything was unorganized. And I remember we took him out to a Tex-Mex place, which is like Texas Mexican food. And we gave him queso, which is like this just melted cheese and chips, and he was losing his mind. He loved it.
Nice.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I really love James White because it's just like, right, like the science of capitalism, right, is if you sell out a little more and you're slightly more profitable than your competitor, you just like edge them out, right, and then you become the single monopoly. But James White has kind of proven that, I guess, the human side of the market or of this community at least exists, and that he can like stick to his priorities, right, and like
or his core values, right,
and like really, stand by those in terms of making this game for players in person and supporting like brick and mortar stores and all that, and still compete and be like wildly successful. And I hope that continues to be the case because, it's really tough out there trying to make it, I'm sure. And, just him not really compromising it and doing it anyway is really, really hard.
Yeah, those are usually the ones that win in the long game too. Like, we all understand like the game of like cutthroat capitalism, and it's like we see it a lot, represented a lot in some of the bigger companies, but the companies that I see become the most wildly successful, the fastest, and that are the smallest, are the ones that are just unrelentingly tied to their core values and just kind of never really, I don't know, sacrifice those in terms to kind of sell out for like a quick buck. The one that comes to my mind is actually Team Covenant, where they just kind of like ate it for years and years and years on end. And they finally kind of just made it. And despite doing that, they're still some of the most down-to-earth people I've ever met. And the reason why they do what they do has almost nothing to do with how much money is coming in the bank. Because of that, the money comes in the bank. It's crazy.
Yeah, totally. We love the TC model and those guys and that sort of thing. It was great to meet Zach at Vegas and get to do a little bit of the limited calling season draft prep with him and you guys. And that was really cool. Another company that comes to mind is like Patagonia, right? Mm-hmm. Like their core values are as much a part of their like, their brand as anything else, and like also lead the industry. in that sort of thing, like I think it seems to create kind of like a cult following, like
Yep.
really, really big fans, you know, like there's definitely those people for Flesh and Blood and for Team Covenant and for, you know, Patagonia and stuff. So it's infectious, right? That's another reason to be in Flesh and Blood, is for how much they kind of support the local scene and that sort of stuff. And now recycled materials. It's all great. It's all great moving forward with that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
And those are the ones who get through the hard parts, right? Because they have like a vision and they have values, so that they're able to go through, you know, like what Legend Story did. They launched the game, and then in less than a year, there was COVID-19 and everything shut down. And they're, you know, it was bad. And, you know, they made it through that, and they made it through that very well, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which is crazy, right? Because they didn't sacrifice anything. They kind of kept printing. They, you know, the crazy thing about Flesh and Blood is it's always been, if you look at the model of Legend Story Studios and Flesh and Blood, it was always built to wildly succeed, and only to wildly succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is built for scale, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
Like even when COVID hit, they didn't change. From what I understand, they didn't really change what they're planning to print, how they're planning to operate, or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And they've always built their model to be just ridiculously successful.
Yeah. 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 It's really smart, and it's really cool to have that foundation to like weather a unprecedented global pandemic and then come out the other side, even though we're still very much like in the pandemic, as it were. Couple of other things here, change gears a little bit. So as like a content creator, right? What do you think, like what's in the works? Like where do you see your channel going? And second question, I love giving you two questions at once. What do you think the future is for other like Flesh and Blood content creators, like outside of just kind of like trying to be a YouTube person that talks about Flesh and Blood, right? Does that make sense?
Kind of. I can talk about like, so Arsenal Pass is interesting because, you know, it was just really organic in how it started, and then we sort of always had the idea that it would scale into something, but not into what it did. And it's interesting going from doing something that, you know, you kind of were just doing because you were passionate about the game and you just wanted to, you know, talk about it or make a video or something. And then it's, you know, it becomes something else, right? There's people that follow it and it's a part of the routine. And, you know, you're now what they call a content creator, which is just it's funny to, when you finally like, I don't even think of myself as that quite yet, but, yeah, and now we're like 6, 7, 8 months down the line, and people are like, "Yeah, what is the future?" It's like, oh, it's tough, right? Because it's like, oh, yeah, I'm not too sure. And you know, we have been very lucky to be as successful as we were, and I think that, you know, for Hayden and I, it's going to be interesting because we're definitely in very different parts of the world. So the time stuff is pretty hard, although we make it work. But we're also just in different places, I think, in our careers. So where it ends up, and we're both at these very sort of interesting ages, right? Like the pre-30s, early 30s kind of time of your life is like where you either decide to do something very different with your life, or you kind of buckle down and double down on what you've been doing and then proceed to kind of focus with that. So we'll see. I'm not too sure. But I think we just kind of take it like not really a day at a time, but, you know, a month at a time, just trying to recalibrate, adding on new sections, trying to make the Patreon better, trying to make the pod better. But at the end of the day, and this is what we've kind of said since the beginning, and I think it's part of our charm and why people like the podcast, is that we're definitely not content creators. We're professional players, and we both want to become world champion, and that's like our number one.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, not to throw shade on, like I enjoy many different content creators in this game, and they all have like very different flavors. That's particularly why I like your guys' content, because you are highly competitive players making content for competitive players, or for everyone. But it's like a bit of a rarity, and this game's new, right? We have a lot of quote content creators who are very good content creators, adopting Flesh and Blood, and again they make some very valuable content. But competitive player turned content creator kind of maybe has like a richer history to draw from, at least initially. And so your guys' content has been just, I guess, like very, very dense, right? Like,
yeah. The whole goal is, I think that the people who follow Arsenal Pass and listen to it are just on the journey with us to try and win the world championship. Like that's what it is. Like that's all we are. It's like we obviously spend a lot of time on content creation, and we care a lot about everybody who follows our stuff and enjoys it. But at the end of the day, we came into Flesh and Blood to be competitive, and that's like our number one goal. And I think that although that might sound kind of weird because it's like, oh, you're not putting this like channel first and all this stuff. It's not that we don't put it first. It's just we have something that we're striving for, and I actually think it's our core competency, and I think it's why people like us.
Well, that's what makes our channel good. But it's going to be pretty tough getting through Taylor and I.
It's okay. I just have Taylor's job prevent him from being able to against me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's one of the things, like, world champion has never been on my radar because of, the other parts in my life. Like, I'm a little bit older than you and Hayden. So I'm like in the trenches already of being past my whatever decision point you talked about. So like for me, for me and Isaac, I'm going to speak for you for a second, Isaac, is we just wanted to contribute to a game we thought was really cool, initially. And we didn't have a lot going on in our lives when we started the podcast. And now it's turned into, a real hobby of ours, making the podcast and that sort of thing. But kind of as our interest in the podcast rose, so did our like interest in being competitive, mine maybe a little bit more than Isaac's. But even then it's like capped at being like, I would be happy to be like just considered like one of the good players. Like, like I don't need to win nationals or anything, but like I want to be able to go to nationals and like get in the top 32 or whatever, like that's kind of where my desire ends up. Because if I put on like that extra level of pressure of like I gotta win nationals, I gotta top 8, win worlds, then like those other aspects of my life would suffer a little bit too much, and then the game would like not be as fun for me anymore, so
yeah it's like weird for me. It's like I just really like Flesh and Blood is, in a sense, what it's become for me is like meditation, right? And it's just the grind of doing it every single day and trying to just beat on that craft and become better. There's something that's very self-actualizing and peaceful about that for me. Is like having this routine and this sort of goal that is virtually impossible, and then every day you just try to take that little step towards the the millions of steps that it's going to take to get there. And there's something about that just makes me much more at peace in my day-to-day life, is having that routine, having that discipline, and just doing things that I don't want to do. Like I just really, I don't know. I don't enjoy it while I'm doing it, obviously, but there's something about that I just love. Like it's just the grind, and the fact that I'm able to have a group of people that I like, a group of people that I consider my friends, join me on that journey, makes it a very unique and I think a very special experience.
Yeah, I think you have a really good attitude about it because it's like, even in this game that mitigates variance, right? Like, there's too much variance to be like, all right, I'm going to win nationals, right? Like, we're not playing chess, so you can't kind of hold that high of a bar for yourself, right? But you can, win multiple tournaments, or get a PPI, or like whatever. You can definitely have very competitive goals set. But I think it's good to get joy in the process and like kind of be proud of yourself for your achievements and things like that. Because again, it's like, I mean, everybody wants to win worlds, and for those who put in the work and really want to win worlds, that's like definitely a goal. But I think it's important to like understand that there is some variance, and there's like all these other factors and stuff like that. So as long as you perform well, like speaking for myself, like Taylor said, he probably does want to be a little more competitive than I do, but I'm like very self-competitive, right? Like I only play a few classes. I want to be like really fucking good at the game, or like at piloting those classes. And nationals kind of was a lucky spot for me because it lined up where one of my classes was in a good position to compete. But that was like pretty fortunate, right? Because had it been Bravo, I would have just been like, shit out of luck. So that was a little bit fortunate for me. But for me, I really enjoy I enjoy that grind also, devoting myself, I guess not to the game as a whole, but to like mastering a few classes and their lines of play and all of that. I guess that kind of brings me to, do you think that if you're a high enough level player in this game, do you think that you can adopt and learn, say, the best deck or whatever in like a month? Or do you think that like true class loyalty, a la Kale McCree, how much of an edge does that give you? Or if you're, the Tarek of the world,
I think that the class, I think the class specialist edge is, it's definitely, it exists, right? It's some non-0%. I think the better that you become at the game and the more you play, the less that, a hyper specialist would have just like an edge on just a very well-rounded and I guess you could say talented player. But that being said, whatever that percent is and whatever it fluctuates to it kind of depends on the meta, depends on where we are. Has there been a new set release? Because it's really the specialists that usually innovate as well, right? And create kind of the new decks for those classes sometimes. But they definitely do it. Like when the new cards come out for Bravo, I'm definitely looking at Kale's deck. But I think in terms of raw gameplay, I feel like raw mechanical gameplay is more like a player-based rather than kind of like a class-based thing. And then you can kind of learn the class from there. But practice is huge in all of that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Isaac. I don't even know how I would answer that, because it would seem that like class loyalty, I don't know. Like Brendan said, it depends on the meta, right? Like as the pool of different heroes widens, right? It becomes like much, much harder to just continue to play one hero, and then even heroes within the same class like don't even play exactly the same. So
yeah, but it's also hard to play 14 heroes as well, right?
Yeah,
which is the counter argument to it. And that's becoming more and more of a thing too. Like right now, I mean, I have played Azalea within the past like year plus, but I haven't played in the past 6 months. So it's if I sat across from Azalea, I know what to not want to see from across the board. Cards which cards would I'd be trying to maybe play around, but ultimately like I wouldn't really know what the deck was doing in terms of its macro strategy and exactly how I was going to counter it. My general approach would probably be like, oh yeah, my deck is probably just fundamentally favored here. So I just play my plan and be proactive, and then we'll see where the game takes us from there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about for sure as the game moves forward and the game itself, the card pool and heroes get bigger and the player base gets bigger. It's there's just so many questions that I have about the future of the game, and I don't even know how to articulate all of them. It'll just be really interesting to see all of those things kind of unfold as we move forward into this next season. With that being said, like, what do you kind of see? Like, we know a few things about the OP structure for next year, but what are your kind of thoughts about, what's going to happen and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think that we'll get... I'm just going to side with one of the estimates I heard, which was 30 callings. That was because of some other number they had quoted, but worldwide. My hope is that they cluster them. There's definitely a positive and negative to clustering callings. The positive is like if they do a calling in Europe, let's say in Germany, if they cluster it with another on the next weekend, you can go to one in the Netherlands the next weekend, you maybe wait the weekend after that, you're in France. Like, that's really ideal for a player like myself that would travel. But it's also a downside because it can just be, your region has like a sprint of competitive callings, and then it's kind of just not on anymore. And it's bad for players that maybe, are busy during those weeks because it's their busy season, or they just don't want to grind every single weekend for 5 weekends, and they want it more spread out. So I hope they cluster it, just because that makes traveling a lot easier. And despite how much of a grind the U.S. Calling circuit was this year, I did really enjoy it. But I also think that I just enjoy suffering a little bit more than other people. So I wouldn't really take my word for it. I'm hoping, we got our callings for the year, we get a couple pro tours, and then we have world championships. That's really what I want to be accomplished.
Yeah. For me, and I think me and Isaac are kind of in a minority, being competitive players that live in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. I would love to see some more stuff just on the West Coast and the major cities. Like, let's get something in like the Bay Area, Portland. I'd even travel to Seattle, just kind of like have some stuff happen like that. Like, it be more regional based. I don't really care the time frame, but if we get another calling in Vegas, I think that's a thing. But then maybe we do get one in the Pacific Northwest. That would be really great too.
They'll definitely do that region. The West Coast was underserved this year, but that was those states were more tight on COVID than the other ones, right? Yeah, especially the South and then the East, definitely the Southeast. So I think that was mostly COVID related, because West Coast is really kind of more of a mecca for card games, especially when we talk Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Well. WotC being in Seattle.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's
also
the factor that we don't for most people living most places, it's a $60 plane ticket to go to anywhere, right? So but for us, geographical proximity matters a little more, but if you live in Orlando, it's just it doesn't really matter where you go. Just buy a cheap plane ticket and get on the plane. So
yeah, I live in Dallas, so it doesn't get much better than that for central location and traveling.
Yeah, totally.
In the U.S.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah,
that you might have already answered, but so what deck would you take to New Zealand or Australian Nats? Is it Viserai?
Yeah, it's Viserai.
And so does Viserai beat Oldhim?
Yeah.
Just combo super tall?
Sort of. It depends, but effectively, yes. Right? It just combos off of Oldhim. I think that it beats everything in the meta, actually. And we haven't even changed the deck very much, at all. The thing is that the gameplay is just so dynamic. It's actually ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And it's not even dynamic based off the card pool. Like the cards that you sub in and sub out definitely matter a lot, but just the way you play the game is so like you have so many fundamental like different ways of playing like the macro game, which is crazy. And obviously the micro play of Viscera is very complicated and very, I don't know, I guess you would say very finessey or whatever. I don't know what that word. That's definitely not a word in the English language, but if it was, that's what it would be. There's a lot of skill to the micro, yeah, and there's a lot of lines. And it heavily rewards, I think, creativity, that deck, and practice.
Does it beat Ice Lexi?
I don't know. We haven't tested it. I would assume yes.
Well, I haven't. Or Taylor and I played the other day.
I got whooped.
But we haven't played the super tall Viscera strategy, right? You weren't like building forever, but then like Lexi also pressures you on the turn you want to pivot. So anyway, this is all just theory. We don't really know, but
yeah.
So
I was just curious.
Like 9 D reacts are like if you run the 9 D react back at you the 6, and then you can be pretty defensive and just kind of build up. And I haven't played it.
Yeah, that's what got me in trouble is I sided in my D reacts, but then I just had frostbite. So now for like a 0 for 4, I gotta pay for 1. Yeah, exactly. That was my next game.
I haven't played the matchup. I honestly I saw the D reacts almost out of every single matchup. The thing is, like the weird thing about the Viscera deck is that there's another player in our group that will almost always tend to combo and like OTK, where I almost always tend to play tempo unless I have to combo to win.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I mean, my list right now is closer to Hamish's list than it is Matt Rogers' list. So in some matchups, I'm looking to kind of get a 9th blade off and kind of combo off of that. Kind of like that's my pivot turn. Rather than doing something insane with Sonata, which that also happens as well. But just, kind of a difference of preference, I think.
Do you run into, right, like this is a deck, right? Like if you're playing, Levia into a hyper efficient deck, right? Maybe your favorite, but it's kind of your game to lose because there's a lot of points that you can make a mistake, right? So this Viscera deck is this like a high skill, right? Like, so if you're playing like 10 rounds of Swiss, if there's a buttload of decision points for you, that's going to make it, X% more likely for you to fail, right? Because you're going to make that many mistakes or whatever.
Yeah. So I think there's a factor. Actually, no. So I think there's a lot of decisions, but the deck is very forgiving. Where like the deck like Chain was just not forgiving at all. You made one mistake, you lost the game. No chance. You lose like 100%. Or like Viscera, I've definitely felt like I've misplayed certain turns, so been able to kind of just pull it out. And I've played like tempo and then realized like the tempo wasn't going to win and started comboing really late in the game and ended up winning because I perfectly stacked my deck and hit a perfect Sonata and had the right cards to go just wide enough. And I just think the deck has more margins for error than some of the really tight decks like Levia and Chain and some others that are, probably Kano as well. So it is a very high skill deck, but I think that, you don't have to play it 100% optimally every time to win every game, where like with Chain and the Fatigue, it felt like you had to play 90 to 100% every time or you just lost. So you had the good side of being able to win, with a 99% advantage, but if you messed up, you lose.
Yeah, totally. Like you can see that in the Hong Kong Nats playback, right? Like the Chain player gets a little loose with his the resources that the deck overall has and gets blizzarded and has like really struggles to make that Ursa token and winds up pulling it out there, but it gets dicey against Fatigue for sure. Everything matters.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Isaac, you got any burning questions before we get into kind of our signature segments? I kind of wanted to talk to Brendan about NFTs, but I feel like that maybe is too deep of a rabbit hole for tonight.
It is a rabbit hole for
We'll
sure.
start our NFT podcast and
I'm so deep down that rabbit hole. It's ridiculous.
we do have a number of listener questions, but we are running out of time here. So I'm just going to ask the first question we got at the top of the list. Mike asks, what's your favorite card?
Yeah, so my favorite card is Chains of Eminence. I just think that it's
I
a
thought
card
you were going to say Drone of Brutality.
That card was interesting, but it was also terrible. Yeah, definitely Chains of Eminence because the utility of that card just scales with the game as more cards get added and more strategies get developed. And it's the perfect card to counter like a theoretically very narrow meta, or a meta that's centered around a very specific interaction of cards, or maybe a single card like Drone of Brutality. Like Chains of Eminence is very good for Drone of Brutality. So the creativity of Chains of Eminence and its use case in the meta this sort of has like an infinite kind of cap, and I think that that's really interesting. So we'll see. And it's a card that I think was created to make unhealthy formats healthy. While it's not been effective enough in the past, there may be a time when it is.
Do you think creepersing it on your opponent's turn is ever going to become like a strategy?
I don't know. That's interesting. I haven't thought about doing it, but there's no persistent strategy that I could think of where I'd want to do that against my opponent. But again, I've been mostly jamming Viscerai into all of the really popular stuff right now because we're just trying to prepare the deck for these nationals.
It was just like a silly thing I thought of the other day. Was like, oh yeah, I could like block with an attack and then like I don't know, chains of Imminence right on top of that as an instant and screw their turn, I guess. I don't know. And break my creepers. I don't know. Yeah. All right, let's get into our signature segments. Are you guys ready for that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So, Brendan, I believe you are familiar with our segment Pick, Pass, Pray. Is this correct?
Acquainted, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to give you 3 cards. I'm going to read them out. You're going to get the first round of picks here. You're going to pick 1 card for your pick, 1 that you're going to pass, and 1 that you pray comes back around. Are you ready? This is a draft scenario.
Ready.
Okay. First card up is Plume of Evergrowth. It is a Earth Equipment headpiece. It blocks for 0. And it has an instant ability. You pay 3, destroy Plume of Evergrowth, return target Earth action card or Earth instant card from your graveyard to your hand. Our second card is Ball Lightning Yellow. It is a lightning attack action. It pitches for 2, costs 0, attacks for 2, and defends for 0. Whenever a lightning or elemental action card would deal damage this combat chain, instead it deals that much damage plus 1. Go again. All right. And the third and final card this evening is Channel Thunderstep. It is a lightning action aura. It pitches for 2, costs 1, and defends for 3. And it reads, go again. Whenever you play an action card, you may pay 1 resource. If you do, it gains go again. Channel Lightning, and then that is a keyword, which means at the beginning of your end phase, put a flow counter on Channel Thunderstep, then destroy it unless you put a lightning card from your pitch zone on the bottom of your deck for each flow counter on it. So, Brendan, which one are you going to pick? Which one are you going to pass? And which one are you going to pray comes back around?
It's interesting because I've never played with Channel Thunderstep in Limited, but I'm definitely picking Plume of Evergrowth. I think that's like a slam pick, especially if it's to pick one. It's a really good card in both Briar and Oldhim. And yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the best cards in the format. So I slam pick Plume anytime I can. It can get you out of, it can help you with offensive plays, but also help you in defensive situations as well. So really good card. Always going to probably pick Plume of Avagoth on most things in the pack. And then Channel Thunderstep, I can't remember if I think that card kind of blows or not. I feel like I do, but then when you read it, I was like, oh, maybe there's a use case for this. But so it blocks for 3, which is great in Briar. I'm trying to think about the use case in Lexi. It's probably good in Lexi. But I think that's going to be my pass. Just because Ball Lightning Yellow is pretty effective in both Briar and Lexi. That being said, I do think Ball Lightning Yellow is the worst Ball Lightning. But yeah, I mean, Ball Lightning is just a very strong card in this format, and it's pretty easy to slot into most Briar and or Lexi Shell. So I'm going to pick the Plume of the Othergrowth, pass the Thunderstep, and pray that the Ball Lightning comes back around.
Awesome. Isaac?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to pick Plume for all the same reasons, right? It helps you if you're playing as Fatigue, or it helps you if you're playing against Fatigue, or, it helps mulligan your hand at a high cost. But,
yeah.
It's just like really versatile. Performs really well. I think that I'm going to pray Channel Thunderstep back around. Not so good in Lexi, but in Briar, it's like for a blue, you can play any 1 cost or 0 cost attack, pay for Go Again, and then pay for Rosetta. I'm like a huge fan of things that turn on Rosetta. And then if you're really lucky and you pitched a blue lightning card for this turn, you get to do it again next turn. You have to play another non-attack action, but also with embodiments, right, it can like block for 4 or 5 maybe or whatever. I think that just the fact that it blocks for 3 and kind of pitches, like you don't always need a blue in Briar. I think that it might be pretty good. That said, I'm kind of kicking myself because Ball Lightning also has auto Go Again, so it's pretty mean in Briar as well. It can also be pretty good in Lexi with the combo into Shipper, and like you can proc the fused arrow twice, its hit effect, and like getting their damage in just because your next attack guarantees dominate. But we're sticking with Channel Thunderstep, I think. All right, on to the next one.
I think you for sure slam Plume, right? Like, for every Brendan's messing with the like UI.
Brendan, do you have something to say?
He's bored. He's bored.
I didn't know what it did, and I was like, "Oh, that's so convenient." There's a little hand button to raise your hand.
So you can raise your hand if we had a bunch of guests on. So Plume, no, hands down, pick it. Like, I don't even know. Like, what's the other thing? Like, maybe pack 1, pick 1, Plume for sure. The only other reason you wouldn't do that is if it was like pack 3 and it gets past you, pick 3, and you're already heavily in Lexi, and you already got a Honing Hood. That's like the only reason maybe not to pick it. I would say early in the meta or like the release of Tails, I would have been like, yeah, Channel Thunderstep, like we could pitch our deck perfectly and then just like blow our opponent out with this Thunderstep situation. But that is like not the case in the format. Like, unless you're playing against Oldheim, you like aren't going to see that Thunderstep again, basically. So its upside is not as great as Ball Lightning, which has like multiple combos with 2 different classes to where you can just like win the game with it. That's like a lot easier to just move into. So pick Plume, pray for Ball Lightning, and pass on Thunderstep. That's what I got.
All right. Glad we disagreed.
Well, I agreed with Brendan, Only basically because he's wearing a tank top. I know you guys won't be able to see the video part of this, but Brendan is sleeveless, and it's pretty exciting, gotta say. All right, Isaac, what's our next segment?
Oh, here at the Attack Action Podcast, we like to play many different board games. Flesh and Blood is not the only board game we play. Today's board game from the closet is Brendan's pick. Now, this may not be his favorite board game or the best board game in the world, but it's one that he would like to share with you guys and you will enjoy as well. Brendan?
What would you guys say if I told you that I had never played like a board game or anything like that? Would you believe me?
Yes.
No way. You definitely played Chutes and Ladders or something.
That's not a board game. Those don't count.
I'm definitely the kind of person that only plays like that one. I don't know. Just not a fun person. I don't have friends. But there's a game called Skytear. I found out about it through Tim Bunn. He's the reigning world champion apparently, and they're actually competing for it in like 7 days. He's going to be defending his title. But it is like a MOBA deck building card game with miniatures, which is a whole, vomit of buzzwords, but it's freaking amazing. It's so good. Oh my goodness. It's super fun. If I was doing the kind of like the beer taste on it, I would say that it's like, there's a hint of miniatures there, while there's a very powerful aroma of deck building and card games, and it's got a very thick body of building your deck. No, it's a really good game, right? Like it is like it is about as close as you can get to like an actual MOBA game in like a card game format, or deck building, miniature, all that kind of stuff. And there's all these different heroes and stuff, and these different regions that do very kind of very specific things, and it's really fun. It's one of the coolest games I've played in like a long time, and I'm absolutely hooked on it. I played it for a few weeks, and then I bought everything they had.
Awesome.
Sounds familiar.
It's the type of game that Isaac would absolutely own me at. Like, it's got all of these things and all of this different strategy and this grand game plan. And Isaac has just like a gigantic brain that can think about all of those things at the same time. I think that's why he likes playing Levia and Ranger. And for me, I would just like definitely lose to Isaac every single time. So this could be a great game for you, Isaac.
So we're not signing up.
Yeah, totally. No, I can't take that. Can't take that much losing to you in my life. It'd be too hard on me. I did want to ask you, I think that's a great pick, by the way, Brendan.
Have you played it?
No, but I was like so close to getting it like
should.
Early in the pandemic, and like watching Team Covenant play it a lot, I'm just like, I don't have the background in MOBAs. And I was like, I don't really get it in that regard, but all the other stuff like the deck building and the unit choices and the like game decisions and stuff seem really cool.
It's sweet. I would caveat by saying it's not like the kind of board game that you bring to like a board game night or to like your family's house. Totally. It's easy to pick up, I guess, right? But it's definitely extremely deep, and the better players win most of the time.
By board game, we just mean like literally anything.
I just worry that someone would get. I just worry that someone would get Skytear and then would like try to get their little brother to play with them, and then just like cream them over and over again.
Yeah, totally.
I just assume that if they're listening to our podcast, they'd probably be on Board Game Geek watching a video about it or something.
Yeah. Brendan, before we do let you go, I forgot at the top of the show to ask you your 3 most interesting facts about yourself. Famously, we asked your co-host Hayden Dale this question, and we found out that he is a competitive like Lindy Hop dancer, rock and roll dancer. So what do you got in your bag that rivals Dance Man Dale?
Yeah. That's wild. So, gosh, I love how it's like Yeah, we'll ask you a bunch of questions. Just roll with it throughout. We don't need to show them to you before. In the end, it's like, what's your 3 most interesting facts? Like, oh, goodness. So I've lived in, obviously, a few places in the United States. Not obviously, but I'll tell you. So Texas and California. But I've also lived in Bangkok, Thailand, and Moscow, Russia. And then I was also living in Istanbul, Turkey, back in November 2020. Well, actually, for a couple of months, starting November. And yeah, I had a history of just kind of like picking up and then just engrossing myself in a completely different culture and different world. And that was like my thing for a while. It only stopped because I had like some medical issues come up. But yeah, that was kind of weird. In college, I played D1 rugby for like 4 years. And I feel like that's not very interesting. But I also had like this like long mane of hair like down to my shoulders.
I've seen the photos on the socials.
Yeah, I had the rugby flow.
Yeah.
Awesome. These are great. You're doing great.
It was my third interesting fact. Oh, man.
You won 4 road to Nats while Hayden was off rock dancing.
Yeah.
Rock and roll dancing, not rock dancing. Hayden's gonna tweet you and be like, "Bro, come on,
I had to get a Hayden.
It's rock and roll."
Got the whole cast without digging at Hayden somehow.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think in topic with the pod and just like the game, even though we already talked about it, Flesh and Blood really is my first card game, which I know is surprising to like a lot of people that I talk to.
That's cool, man. I'm not surprised. You're a disciplined young man, so it's
young man.
It makes sense. Do you have like sweet rugby drinking songs that you want to regale us with?
Yeah, if you want to get demonetized from YouTube, bro.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Maybe we'll have to figure out a way for you to serenade us while we film Hayden dancing. That's kind of maybe the ultimate maneuver right there that we're gonna have to figure out how to make that happen.
I don't know if rugby songs are a stereotype, but if they are, it's a very accurate stereotype.
No, yeah. My freshman year, one of my best friends' roommates, I guess, was on the women's rugby team. So, as a underaged person, I was definitely at many rugby house parties, and it's what a culture.
Yeah.
And the university I went to in Colorado had like a rugby alumni night, and the bar scene was also out of control. There's nothing like 40-year-olds reliving their heyday in rugby on the field and then going for it late at night too. It was freaking.
That's so funny because that's such a thing. It's ridiculous.
I know. It's pretty wild. Great game, rugby. Actually, this is funny. This is so many tangents right here, but I started watching a ton of rugby during Road to Nats season because I thought it would be. I was like, oh, this is funny. Like the game's made in New Zealand. I'll just watch a bunch of like old All Blacks World Cup games to like get myself freaking ready. And then I went, and then I just went like undefeated in my first Road to Nats. So there could be a little secret sauce in watching some World Cup All Blacks games. Just saying. There's a little extra tidbit for the listeners.
I didn't know you did that. That's pretty fun.
Totally. Rugby's a freaking sweet game, dude. I freaking love it. It's so cool. At first you watch it and you're like, there are no rules. There aren't any rules in this game. I don't know what's happening. And then you like totally you peel back the layers, as it were.
Yeah. There's a lot of depth to it.
Yeah. Totally. Well, Brendan, I want to thank you for being on. Is there anything you want to plug? As in terms of your socials, your podcast. I know you like to shout out your YouTube page, etc. So,
yeah. So if you're looking to pick up Skytear, my friends over at Team Covenant have it for sale. So that's always a great place to pick it up. They are actually the exclusive distributor if you want to get any of the new releases. So shout out to Team Covenant. They hooked me up as well. And Sky Terrier is a fantastic game. I just want to give a shout out to, let's think, both Hayden Dale and Dan Mackay, because they have their nationals coming up. Really excited for them to hopefully win the nationals in their respective countries and take down the nationals for our testing teams. We haven't gotten one yet, unfortunately, so we need to get one to hang on the wall. And just a shout out to all the listeners, and thank you so much for having me on. It's always a blast, always a pleasure talking to you guys, and I really hope that enough changes in 2022 that I will be able to see much, much more of you.
Yeah, same. Yeah, for sure. And anytime, you or Hayden want to just come hang out at the house, you just let me know. We'll just have like a invite only on the orchard up here.
Yeah.
Just get really crazy. Crazy with it.
We always end our podcast on a strong note.
Yeah, totally. You can just imagine it now. We're like pressing cider by day, then the afternoon pick up rugby game, and then afterwards Hayden's doing a victory dance, and then we're playing some Flesh and Blood in the evening. Sounds great,
yeah.
Right?
It's getting wild out in the wilderness of Northern California.
Yeah, totally. Well, great. Well, that's our show. Thanks, everybody. Brendan, thank you again. I had a really great time, and hopefully see you again in the future, my friend. Goodbye.
Good night.
What a great function.